Mr. Speaker, members, this amendment seeks to eliminate any confusion by this bill's new standard of residence. The bill would prohibit a person from registering at a previous residence unless the person inhabits the place at the time of designation and intends to remain. Without a clarification, many people who are temporarily away from their homes, such as college students off at Texas A&M or University of Houston or here at UT, they may believe that they cannot register at their home address back where they still want to vote for their parent who's a representative, merely because they do not physically inhabit the place on the day that they register to vote. My amendment would simply clear up any confusion by inserting subsection C at the beginning of the new definition of residence, which makes clear that a person does not lose their residence by leaving their home to go to another place for temporary purposes only. This is to make it abundantly clear so we don't have confusion later. I know there may be a disagreement of whether it does that or not, so let's just make it clear and clean it up right now so we don't have to deal with it in the courts later. So I move adoption.
The chair recognizes Mr. Paul to speak in opposition to the amendment.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, members, this is really not necessary. In fact, it even clearly says that if college students move, that they can even register where they're at. Current law already states that college students can move and keep residence where they're at, where they actually live with their parents. So we're not affecting that part of the code, and we don't think that this is necessary and duplicative. So with that, I stand against the amendment.
The chair recognizes Mr. Bucy to close on the amendment.
Members, this goal here is to make it abundantly clear that if I'm a college student, I'm away at Texas A&M, I turn 18 and I wasn't already registered, maybe I don't want to register at Texas A&M. I want to register back in Mays District to make sure I can still vote for Mays if that's where I come from. This makes it abundantly clear, maybe Wills District. All over the place, we want to be able to register. This makes it abundantly clear that that college student who's away and registering back home can do that. If we don't do this, I promise you we're going to have court cases. We're going to have confusion. Let's avoid that right now. The disagreement isn't over wanting to make sure that can happen. It's over whether we can do it or not. Let's make sure right now that we can absolutely do that. So please vote for this amendment. And I close. Thank you. I move adoption.
The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment. The record of vote has been requested by Mr. Bucy. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Bucy voting aye. Show Mr. Paul voting nay. Show Ms. Meza voting aye. Mr. Harris voting nay. All members voting. All members voted. There being 68 ayes, 76 nays, the amendment fails to adopt. Following amendment, clerk read the amendment.
Amendment by Bucy.
The chair recognizes Mr. Bucy to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This amendment seeks to remove an unnecessary burden to voters trying to confirm their residence address. The bill currently lists out which documents would be sufficient proof of residence, but arbitrarily requires the voters to use whichever document happens to appear first in the list as written in this bill, regardless of how difficult it may be for the voter to submit that particular document as opposed to another of the documents listed. This bill inherently recognizes that any of the documents listed is sufficient proof of residence. So there's no good reason to prefer one over the other. So let's just make it easier to take any of these approved upon documents as laid out in this bill to be the reason that we prove our residency. I move adoption.
The chair recognizes Mr. Paul to speak in opposition to the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, members, there's a set reason of why we had these written in an order. In fact, like I said, this is something that's really worked out with a lot of stockholders. We actually talked about this with Senator Bencourt. They were clear they wanted to keep this order in. And the reason is it starts with your photo ID is the document most clearly associated with your current residence. And again, these got to be documentation that shows where you actually reside to be clear that where you reside in that. Almost everyone has a photo ID. That's why they are listed in a preferential order. This amendment removes the intentional preferential order. Just like voting in person, there are 7 acceptable forms of ID. If you don't have one of these, you can vote with the reasonable impediment declaration and another form of ID. Let's keep the intentional preferential order, and please vote no on this amendment, and let's keep this worked out where we've worked it out with the DPS to clearly show that we know the person's residence on it. So I ask you to stand with me and make sure we stand with this and vote this amendment down and move this over a clear bill over to the Senate.
The chair recognizes Mr. Bucy to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, if you look at the bill, there are 6 approved documents in this bill, but it ranks them, and there's no need, if all 6 are sufficient, to rank them. That creates an undue burden on the voter who's trying to comply with the bill to confirm their residence. So I please ask you, let's not have what was probably a typo. Let's just allow any of the 6 documents. And so I ask you to vote yes on this amendment. I move adoption. Thank you.